All right. I've been excited about this one. Production quality, second to none. I don't know the lore of the Jailer that well, so I'm hopeful this will help inspire me. It's going to be spoilers for that. I don't care. But I do know the story of Endsinger. I've been starting to get into WoW lore. I'm doing my best. I've been a long-time WoW player, but I've never really played for lore. So videos and stuff that have kind of like, I guess, spoiled it for me has made it a lot easier to take on what is 15 years of lore that is just spread all over, everywhere from like books to in-game to content that's no longer available in-game. So you'd have to like play classic when they get to that point. So I'm looking forward to this. One of them was well received by most, but not all. And one of them, from my perspective, was received by few, but not everybody. So let's call those ratios like 90-10 either direction, 80-20, something like that. But inverted. So I'm interested to see what he does with this. I think he handled his comparison of WoW versus 14 fairly well. So let's get into this.
It's been a year since Endwalker came out, and the newest World of Warcraft expansion is here, so I shouldn't have to say spoiler warning, but I'm gonna do it anyway. The following video contains some pretty big spoilers for Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker and World of Warcraft Shadowlands, because this video is about the final bosses of these expansions and how on paper they appear to be the exact same thing. I'm a fan of tropes. I love them. I love being able to see them coming from a mile away. It's honestly how I end up guessing the plot to most of the things I play, and it's why I love a good mystery. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, a trope is a common convention in a particular medium. Something used enough to be recognized as that thing. Storytelling uses tropes all the time, and these two games love their tropes. One of the ones I've never been a fan of, but MMOs love to do, is the true final boss, or man behind the man, or greater scope villain trope. All of which can really just be summed up like this. You arrive at the final boss of a video game, and as you do a battle, they say something along the lines of like, "You fools, all this evil stuff I've been doing is actually to prevent something much worse from happening, and that worst guy, you don't even know him yet, but he's terrible." And then, depending on the scope of the game, the guy either shows up right then as the form of something totally insane, or in the case of most MMORPGs, they become the focus of the next expansion. I think it's safe to say we've all seen this before, and it drives me crazy, because I've always thought it just seems like they were kicking the narrative can down the road. But I will admit, it is a great and easy hook to get people invested on what's to come next. But with that said, it can get very stale very quick, which is why
It also, like, very stale very quick, is because we do it over and over. So, like, if that got you from the base game into the expansion, it doesn't really matter if that was over 3 months or 3 years. It's fine. It's that World of Warcraft is in 9.0. Final Fantasy is in 6.0. If they've used a pattern, they've used it over and over. If they've avoided revealing something because they thought, oh crap, that's going to make the world less interesting, they've been avoiding it for a very long time. As opposed to when somebody comes in and says, hey, I play this game, and I've really been enjoying it. It's been out 6 months, and they don't even have any of these issues. Well, neither did World of Warcraft for their first 6 months, or their first 2 years. A lot of the issues of these games, they both run into flaws that a lot of times are about an imperfect system that was allowed to remain imperfect, and its flaws got to just continue to last year after year, expansion after expansion. And so as I get into the lore of these games, there's no different. And so if you did not write a story with its end in mind, there's this idea of like, well, I'll figure it out later. You won't. You won't. Like, historically, the best stories that I've ever read, watched, whatever, have always been written where they knew the end before they wrote the beginning. And so then everything along the way mattered. And so you never end up with something like an important weapon that doesn't get used, or an important army that really there's no easy way to beat, and so it either has to just die or not matter. You kind of know going in that it's like, hey, remember all that stuff I laid out? It turns out everything mattered, and it's because when I was writing then, I already knew about now.
So when both Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft Shadowlands release expansions where the villain we start chasing at the beginning turns out not to be the final boss of the expansion, but instead is that other even worse thing. In this case, the Endsinger and the Jailer. Two characters that we know nothing about. We're about to enter a game where we have zero connection to the villain, and even worse, don't really know or care about their motivations. And yes, that was the case with Shadowlands. So then how the hell did Final Fantasy XIV make it work? Well, let's start with the baseline of Shadowlands. A man who at that point in the story you've seen being evil in a few cutscenes, but is really still shrouded in mystery. We kind of know what he wants to do, but we don't know why. We don't know what his end goal is. It's really the quintessential problem with the true final boss or man behind the man trope.
MMORPGs, the reason that I never engaged in them as lore is I never found them as rewarding as a format that was more apt to tell whatever story it wanted to. So MMORPGs have to do a couple of things. First of all, they typically release with a very large chunk of content up front and then continued patches along the way while the dev team works on the next big large wave. So you get to tell one big story and then a little bit of story and then one big story. And so that's kind of the format. That's the amount of paper you have to write your story with. World of Warcraft has somewhere between 2 and 4 patches per expansion, on average 3, but in the case of Shadowlands, things didn't quite go to plan, it seemed. Final Fantasy always has exactly 5 patches, and the final of the 5th patches has story in its half patch. So you end up with a 6th full-sized patch narratively. In addition to that, they have made many of their side content chances to expand on the lore. World of Warcraft has historically heavily leaned on a series of quests telling the story that are augmented by books outside of the game, and then those build to a head where the raid boss is supposed to be this big thing that we all know about. As somebody that didn't really know about, like, reading quests wasn't fun, I already have to go kill 10 bears, and at the last place I had to kill 10 bears, so just let me get to killing bears. I didn't read those quests. I play video games in part because I'm not a big reader, and so I like visual storytelling, and so I like movies, I like television, and I like video games. I like visual storytelling that is not done in print. And so that means that a lot of the lore that is meant to make these quests all make sense is locked away from me behind not just a paywall, but an activity that is not a leisure activity for me. And so locking that lore away has historically done that. But as we've moved into recent expansions, primarily talking about Shadowlands here, they have been ever closer moving to what they call a campaign quest. And a campaign quest is a core narrative thread that the player, in the case of Shadowlands, had to clear all the zones in a particular order, and you had a minimum number of quests that you knew would be cleared in a specific order, which gave the writers the ability to try to write something cohesive. That was the intent. But in theory, this is building on over a decade of the game where that was not available to previous writers on the game. And so they are having to piece together. So yes, they get to tell a cohesive story, but it's not a cohesive story concurrently after previous cohesive stories. It's a concurrent story after previous shotgun approaches, where what has been described to me as I get into WoW lore for my first time and I'm starting to take on all these zones and things like that, I've been told that really the best way to do it is to take each zone as kind of a D&D one-shot that's all taking place in one universe. So as he kind of talks about this, like, there is some context that what they were doing in Shadowlands came off of the BFA war campaign quests. And so, like, they're just now starting to find the canvas to write the story in game with, as opposed to Final Fantasy already knows exactly how much canvas they have, and they've gotten to refine how good they are at painting a picture on that canvas.
We're told by people we just met, who we're told are important, to go kill this guy because it's for the greater good. And that is pretty much what we do. We're still never really told why he's doing any of the things he's doing, but we know that he's going to rewrite reality, and it's our job to stop him.
Across 2 patches. Two big patches. Like, right? It was 2 patches till we got to kill the jailer. So you've got the base story to resolve everything that the lack of previous campaign quests did not do. explain everything that had been out there in a cohesive way that in theory could be consumed not just by lore experts, but people who had no idea what was going on, then move us on to this new villain, then progress the villain. These are very rapid. For the fact that they take place over 2 years, it's not the same as something that takes place over 3 books or something like that. This is very, very rapid. This is something that is designed to be done in a visual storytelling format where sometimes you're doing things like traveling or killing. So it's not non-stop narration. And during that narration, you effectively have something between 20 and 60 hours is a generally accepted amount of single player story to be done in the primary. And then you have your number of patches that is only a couple hours of narrative gameplay, or people are going to begin getting frustrated that you've locked away some sort of system that gets them to better loot. So you have effectively no more than 100 hours. Likely your need to be able to be clearable much quicker than that. Much quicker. And World of Warcraft has built a player base that there might be people in there that like lore, but they have built a player base of people who are clearly ready and willing to support a game that has never forced them to engage in lore, which means it's not crazy that somebody like me who likes just the gameplay and doesn't care about the story likes WoW. So when you built a player base by me, you don't get to shift to the longer end of that. You don't get to go, okay, I was told we have somewhere between 30 and 100 hours, let's go for 100. You need to stay way on the 30-hour end of things across the entire expansion, which means your initial expansion serving is probably 18 to 25 hours long, and that's it. That's the amount of time you have to tell the beginning, middle, and end, as opposed to Final Fantasy, a franchise associated with great storytelling, could make Endwalker their finale, their end of it all, their final big building up to a new boss that we didn't know about, was like 60 or 70 hours before the 5 patches that will come after it, which historically, you always took the first 3 of those to wrap up the previous expansion. Endwalker, that wasn't the case, but that's the expectation, that anything that somehow slipped out the far end of Endwalker, we could deal with in the 5 remaining patches that we already know are coming, and each one will have anywhere between 3 and maybe even 5 hours of story in it. So across the remainder of the expansion, we're going to get more patch narrative content in Final Fantasy across raids, alliance raids, trials, class quests, tribal quests, and MSQ across the 5 patches than World of Warcraft will get in their entire base expansion. And as a game goes, World of Warcraft is substantially more front-loaded with the amount of content that they give on an expansion drop versus what you get over the patches.
Once he's defeated, we're shown a very quick and pretty flimsy explanation of why he did what he did. But at that point, honestly, it's way too late. Apparently, he was once the arbiter of the afterlife and decided the first one's creations were defective and unable to withstand the, yeah, you got it, greater scope villain to come. Yeah, that's right. The one true final boss who we've come to learn has orchestrated everything since the beginning of us playing. It's actually revealed that there is another something that's even worse than he is, and it's coming, and he was trying to be prepared for it, I guess, and now you, the player, have to stick around to the next expansion, I assume, in order to find out more. So yeah, that sucked, and it still sucks saying it out loud again, but it should at least be understandable why it sucks now. There was nothing at stake for the player. Sure, you're told there was, but I don't know anyone who found the jailer fight resonate with them on an emotional level other than, oh look, new loot. So then let's bring it back and ask again, how on earth could this increasingly lame trope end up so differently in Final Fantasy XIV?
It's really hard to make it matter. I love player agency. Player agency is no better represented than in games like D&D, where the players get to choose every single thing. But in MMORPGs, compared to even single-player games, you have very little control because we all need to end up at the same place. So the question here is not necessarily, in my opinion, why did Endsinger resonate over the jailer? I think he's starting to hit on something much broader. Why does Final Fantasy get to tell a story that resonates when MMOs as a whole typically really struggle? It is not insane to think somebody would download the free trial now with the critically acclaimed Heavensward, link in the description below of all my videos, of Final Fantasy XIV and say, I think I'm going to try this game out and then skip the story. Every MMO you've ever played before Final Fantasy may have taught you that lesson, even if World of Warcraft is not on that list.
Well, before we even start, Final Fantasy XIV is a story-heavy game, unlike WoW. So the onus is on the 14 dev team to make this trope work. They've got more real estate in their game for storytelling, but still, it's not an easy trope to make good. So let's start with the previous expansion. Just like Battle for Azeroth, the story beats were being set up in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. In it, the villain mentions that the reasoning for all their schemes was that long ago, their people were killed in a great calamity, and the cause was this mysterious song or sound from space. It warped their world, killed countless people, and only by creating their dark deity Zodiark, the same Zodiark we've been trying to fight since the beginning, could they stop this mysterious song. But when we, the player, finally stand face to face with Zodiark, everyone playing was asking the exact same question. Hold up, why are we doing this at level 83? We're not even halfway through the expansion. That's right, the game pulls the old switcheroo on you, and the big final boss we've been promised for 10 years is defeated. Oh, but remember that little tidbit about Zodiark being the thing that stopped the mysterious song? Well, it's back. And so early in the expansion, the story completely shifts its focus to stopping this mysterious force we've never met before and honestly have never really cared about. And this is when the Final Fantasy XIV team spends the next 20 hours of gameplay showing you why you should care. Sure, they take us to new places, we meet new characters, but the focus is returning to the places we know and love. The world you, the player, have been defending for a main game and 4 expansions is literally on fire. The same chaos that swallowed the world in the past is happening again. Except instead of just being told it happened, you're now seeing it happen in real time.
Over 20 hours. I don't think Dragonflight's main story took me 20 hours in total. So 20 hours from where they subverted our expectations, which is not the first time they've done that. And so there's this idea of they build something up, you get to the show, and the headliner opens. And then you're like, well, wait a second. Then who's going to play after that? Because normally I expect there to be an opening act to get us there. There is this idea that they come out and do that. And this subverting of expectations is something that Final Fantasy does often, incredibly often. And I think that's very fun because then it leaves you with that guessing moment. Even if they end up just using tropes, as he notes, those tropes are not the trope you came in with months of expectation harvesting. We get 3 main boss encounters across the Final Fantasy expansion. One around the level, the first third, so let's call that the level 3. Out of the 10 levels, we're going to go up. The second is somewhere around 2/3 of the way through. Let's call that the 6 or 7. And then the last one is going to be at the level cap of that expansion. And we get those 3 every time. Along the way, we tell these different dungeons, as opposed to World of Warcraft in Shadowlands or Dragonflight didn't even make me run their dungeons, much less put true big boss encounters that I join a group of players and it has harder modes available later for fancy loot and all that. That all gets saved to the end. So Shadowlands built all the way up, and then there's a raid at the end of it, and then future raids in future patches tell that story. So they also have a chance to go ahead and put that boss in early. As World of Warcraft players, imagine if you had a chance to fight a single boss, an Onyxia type thing that later got brought back in a heroic and mythic mode for level capped characters, but imagine that you ran across that in the very first zone you did. Or in the Dragonflight terms, imagine if in the Waking Shore, you had not just fought along in a cutscene like something like that, but you had literally followed Wrathion or Sibelian into battle, and you had gone ahead and already had a fight with one of these proto-drakes, and that had to be done with a group of players, and that was some of the very first heroic and mythic content that we did over the expansion. That's some of the very first level capped content that people do after hitting level cap is loop back and fight the harder modes of these. That gives you an opportunity to not make it feel cheap, where it's a single player scenario that's designed to be clearable by anybody, but also not make it feel like it's at the end, and so you can insert it in early and make it feel really meaningful. As a matter of fact, in Final Fantasy, I get really upset sometimes when they build up to something and it ends up just being a dungeon boss, because they have this opportunity with their trial system to give something mechanical weight to back up its narrative weight. And World of Warcraft just doesn't have this. They simply do not have a mechanical way to tell a story like this in the way the game is formatted right now.
But it isn't just the stakes we're shown, we're also shown why it's all happening to begin with. It was, unbeknownst to any of them, one of their own that set all of this in motion. Having it all doesn't mean that you're happy. And one ancient felt this very way. As he slipped further into depression, he decided to create a multiplicity of messengers, his little birds, to fly across the stars in search of hope. Surely out there, somewhere amongst the stars, was his answer. Surely someone had found a reason for him to keep going. And so these little bird children, made of pure emotion, venture off into the stars in order to find hope for a man who has none, and run directly into the Fermi paradox. And Final Fantasy XIV doesn't shy away from this. Yes, his creations do discover there's life out there, but the answer to the question of, is there hope for me out there? The answer isn't one that he's gonna like. Every single world and civilization, no matter how big or small or powerful or collapsing or polluted or whatever, every single one was engulfed by hopelessness and despair. And realizing that there is no external hope or joy for their creator to bring back to him, they come to the conclusion that this is the fate of all living beings in the universe. Even the universe itself, in time, will come to a dark, sad end. And I'm sure by now you're like, okay, Jesse, I get it. So the difference is essentially you're fighting the concept of death in Warcraft and the concept of despair in Final Fantasy XIV. And the reason 14 works so well is because you gave a detailed backstory, and it makes it hit home why it's important. And you would be totally wrong, because the reason 14 is better has nothing to do with the backstory of the villain. Your character has spent numerous expansions facing hopeless situation after hopeless situation, always emerging victorious. It's a theme of the game that you aren't just a mere adventurer anymore. You're a beacon of hope that lights the way for others. Your actions, even the smallest of kindnesses, inspire others to be better. And now you're probably like, okay, so there's a lot of emotional resonance that connects this expansion back to older expansions. But even that's not the complete answer, because the real reason this boss works is something I think the developers picked up on early in telling this story. Creating a moment like this to end a 10-year story arc in an MMORPG where everyone's experience is a little bit different, the only way to deliver that boss fight is to, one, acknowledge this journey was never about the character. It was about you, the player, who's going through your own shit and your own struggles, and the entire expansion is an acknowledgement that despite any despair in your own life, you're still here. And two, fan service. Lots of fan service.
To add a third, he used a word in there when he first described it. End. World of Warcraft took us to the Shadowlands, my limited understanding, because it was the realm of the dead. And it is basically this area where you sit in purgatory in one of these set zones to redeem your life force, to redeem your soul or whatever. And they use this anima that comes from your life force as their energy. And that was all being funneled to this zone where the unredeemables go, right? That final circle of hell where there is not meant to be a way out. And everything was being funneled there. And your character goes there, except they're suddenly allowed to walk this zone, the Maw. They're the Maw walker. And none of it really matters in the end, and you get to come back. If we had found out that our character had really died, and this was the end of your character, and to move forward, we were going to need to move to do a time skip or something and go back and replay events before, or have your character born anew through some method where there's some sort of reincarnation. But that chapter was over. That's what Endwalker proposed. There is something incredibly powerful about them taking a huge creative risk that has caused a lot of people who had been maybe looking for a chance to move on to other games have taken legitimate breaks. And maybe Final Fantasy XIV will get those people back, or maybe they won't. They took an enormous commercial and creative risk by saying this is the end of Final Fantasy XIV's narrative arc. They have been building to this over the years. They've laid the groundwork, they've done this, and it will end. At the end of that boss fight, it's not that she looks up and says, "And if only you knew that I did this to protect you from somebody even badder." This was literally the end. And when it ends, it ends. It's the finale. And if Shadowlands had been a full-featured expansion with a full, let's say, 4 patches, and at the end of it, the jailer had defeated us, or we had to die to beat the jailer, and then it was over, and we had to let time pass and let the Shadowlands heal, and then allowed our soul to be recycled through them in the way that it was always meant to be, with our covenant being our final resting place. That could have been different. If we found out that the bad guys won or the good guys won at a cost where it was over, and now we were effectively in WoW 2, except you bring your mounts and your cosmetics and your gold and your pets, you bring all that crap in, but it is a new narrative chapter. That's something that Final Fantasy did. So none of it mattered in the end, because if you didn't play Shadowlands, if you left at the end of BFA, if you come back today, you pick up the quest to go into Dragonflight, and none of it mattered. None of it. That's a huge problem with World of Warcraft storytelling, is at the end of the day, if you want to skip an expansion, skip it.
Everything you've done up until now has mattered, and every person you've met, just like in real life, walks away with an impression of you. And in this game, you leave a great impression, because as the final day approaches, the people of the world unite behind you, friends and former enemies, to help rocket you to the stars. Hell, even the primals, the very gods you've gone up against countless times, offer themselves up to power your ship to the stars.
Shadowlands could have done this. The bosses you beat in the past are in the Shadowlands. That's where they went. The people who died with you along the various expansions. I'm a story skipper. I still know who the bosses I killed were. I still know the various people that have fought alongside me and died. They were there. Shadowlands had all the same tools available.
The final encounter of Endwalker isn't about the boss, it's about you. The road that you've walked, the hours and hours you, the player, have put into the game. The musical medley is a reminder of that. But like any good final boss fight, there's a second phase.
Shadowbringers had some callbacks, but Shadowbringers was a brilliant musical track that had a lot of stuff that felt really unique. Endwalker was not. Shadowbringers was nominated but didn't win for best sound or music or whatever. Endwalker was not and shouldn't have been. When you win an award, in my opinion, that's because you've transcended the game. You've become something that should be of note to everybody else, even people who don't play your game. That is not what happened here. Endwalker's musical track, their whole score, was not about anybody who doesn't play Final Fantasy XIV. This was intimate. This was written for the players. No one else. Not to be shared with a friend, not to be listened to on Spotify. It might be there, but that's to give it access to the players. In my opinion, what was beautiful about it is that it was written, maybe somebody else enjoys it and thinks it's cool, but it was written to be unbelievably moving as a series of remixes and rehashes and reworks and different genre swaps to existing music in the game. It is bringing an end to what for some people had been playing since not just 1.0, but had been looking at this game since it was first announced as a project. They may have hundreds or even thousands of hours, but it has been a part of their life for well over 10 years, as much as 13 years, I believe. For some of these people, it has been in their life that long. And so they look back, and maybe they only have a couple hundred hours or a couple thousand hours with it, but those couple thousand hours have been spread across graduations, children's being born, weddings they've been to, funerals they've been to. And so this game has come to be something that they have played in good times and in bad, when they had a lot of time in the week and when they didn't. And so this callback takes you to all these favorite memories, these boss fights, these triumphs with your friends, these triumphs in solo content where you're remembering, do you remember when? The music is such an incredibly powerful part of Endwalker, as opposed to the music in Shadowlands is good game music. Like, it's fine.
Second phase. The Endsinger thinks they killed us. This is our second phase. And the boss music is our theme song. Yes, it is literally a power of friendship moment, and honestly, it's perfect. And just like when you play a boss for the first time and don't know the mechanics and suddenly they gain all their life back, the Endsinger goes from strategic attacks and throwing planets at you to now wildly flailing in order to prevent the light from engulfing it. Because despite knowing that the Endsinger may be correct, that in the end we all fade away, you never lose hope. The Final Fantasy XIV writers saw what they had to do, make this trope about another big bad who's way worse out there, and not only did they set out to deliver a backstory, but they also made it clear that that part wasn't even all that important, because the real story is acknowledging where you started, where you've been, and those you've met along the way. The good, the bad, all of it. Not just in a video game, but in your life. And that shit is universally beautiful. And so we circle back to World of Warcraft, which seems lacking in comparison. But because of who I am, you know I can't just let it sit at that.
And WoW can do this. WoW can do this. In Shadowlands, that's the only expansion he's bringing up here. In Shadowlands, they have a system that Final Fantasy fans would refer to as grand companies called covenants. They are expansion specific, and you have to choose one and only one. And when you choose your one, you have to go through a quest line with them that is a story told to them. And as somebody who picked Ardenweld, I got to take part. They said, hey, we have a big celebration, and there's actually a play being performed. And we want you to be in the play. We want you to see our play. We want you to be part of our celebration. And that play makes callbacks to big moments in the community, to moments that we laugh at, to moments we make fun of. It can point at the player and be a champion for them. It can point to big narrative moments that I remember because as a story skipper, it's still important when you kill a boss and see a cinematic, and it can make callbacks to those. And I imagine there's even more callbacks if I'd actually been somebody who'd read all the books and all the quests. But even as a story skipper, I had a blast getting to know my covenant early on in the expansion. WoW can do this. So I think there is something more frustrating if WoW was just incapable of this. If WoW was just, it's not possible, then honestly, I wouldn't ever get upset at it. I'm not going to be mad, right? But this is an MMORPG. We are built around characters, and time again, there are times in WoW where we do care for a character. There are times in WoW where people look back and they have these big shared moments, and some of them are small and become a lot bigger than they expected, and they're about some turtle making it to the water or a guy named Mankirk who can't find his wife. But they are big and they are lasting and they permeate, and they are not player written. They are introduced by a narrative choice from the development team. They can do these things. They can. So I think the frustration is more validly placed because they're missing the mark of something that they absolutely could be good at. Do they need to be as good as Final Fantasy? No. They were a a strategy game franchise that became an MMO, as opposed to a narrative-based franchise that became an MMO. So whether you play Final Fantasy for story or not, it always needed to have a good story just to pay tribute to the name on the door. World of Warcraft had the option to add that later. So you get to choose kind of what things are important in which game, but they're still present. And so WoW can tell a good story. I think it's why people are excited that Chris Metzen's coming back. So the frustration with Shadowlands is not WoW bad. If it was that simple, why would we be mad?
Shadowlands could have been roughly the same, except the focus always should have been on fan service. Why they thought anyone would give a damn about the truly unimportant characters that manage the afterlife. The focus of the expansion from the beginning should have been about giving a send-off to the characters players both loved and hated for the last 15 or 20 years.
And it could have been a subtle undertone. Final Fantasy has a lot of like subtle undertones where there's another story going on at the same time. So like the Garleans are going on at the same time, or the Ascians are going on at the same time, but they're not our focus. So it could have been their like hot fuzz where we're in this wonderful place, but then it turns out there's something else. And then the way to pay tribute to that would have been to have a second expansion take place in the Shadowlands. Okay, now that I've been here for 2 years and I built up reputation with Lady Vosh, Lady Vosh says, hey, I didn't want to make a big deal of it. It's pretty crazy that we've spent the last 2 years getting to know each other and laughing about that time you killed me. But I thought maybe you should know there's something going on here. So actually what he's saying is really cool because it doesn't mean they couldn't have gotten where they ended up. They just needed to do what he's saying so far first.
Just giving the players that little bit of closure on just a few storylines would allow them to finally work in all those other characters that have to sit on the sidelines for every other expansion. Also wrapping up plot points like, oh, I don't know, the giant sword, or the fact that everyone's favorite Draenei is now a literal genocidal maniac.
It's the perfect place for retcon. It is the perfect place to go back through a franchise that was not based in being narrative first and answer all the questions. This was your chance because it was a chance to go back and hear the way events really unfolded from people that have already died. This was your chance to tell some of those stories through optional methods, such as, I don't know, a secondary profession about digging up treasure on lore of both things that have happened and will happen. Why is archaeology not in Shadowlands? Like, Shadowlands was the perfect chance to make an enormous narrative exposition, and you could have put a player garrison there that could have been our player housing, and we always refer back to, and future expansions could be a lease into the living or something like that, so we always can come back here, because the Shadowlands could have been a place we paid tribute to for years. For years. The initial premise of the Shadowlands is, do you remember back in vanilla when you died and had to walk back to your body from that, like, floaty angel thing? Yeah, that's a place. Yeah, so, like, normally people go there and then the Arbiter decides where they go from here. So, like, yeah, that's where dead people go. Imagine a Final Fantasy expansion that took place in the Ethereal Sea and then turned out to be like, yeah, but like, mostly there's just some people here that don't get along and somebody was abusing power, but none of it really matters. And next expansion, we're going to leave the Ethereal Sea. What a waste!
So like I was saying, we don't even have to really change that much. We can work with the zones we were given. The plot of Bastion should have been about Arthas, Uther, and Jaina coming together and forgiving each other.
Like, what he's describing is so much of what they've done with Dragonflight.
This area adds some even more weight to his character and his unwillingness to budge. Now, why did we do all this, Jesse, you may ask? Well, it all comes together in the final fight, where, again, because who gives a damn about the jailer, this moment is for you, the player. This guy thinks he's some unstoppable evil that's gonna wipe out reality, but you are the champion of Azeroth. And this time, you brought your friends. Yes, I am 100% stealing from Final Fantasy XIV, but some of WoW's best stuff is stolen from other games. So as you're battling the jailer with your raid, imagine it looks like he's gonna wipe you, and then the music swells, and from the sides, Jaina and Arthas and Uther appear. But wait, that's not all. Tyrande and the countless wisps of Teldrassil descend from above, all the warriors of the past. We're talking your favorite characters from the beginning. They're coming through portals like it's endgame. And just for good measure, Garrosh, who has been a dick through the entire expansion, who probably, in my version, would have been the final boss of a raid or a dungeon. He comes through like no one's gonna end reality unless it's me, you son of a bitch. Can you even imagine how hyped this fight would be? And that's not even a detailed version, that's just an idea. But that moment alone would have the fan base hyped for countless expansions to come because the payoff for caring was there.
I have been a story skipper for a long time in MMOs, and there was nothing cooler than in Legion when I got to play as Illidan against the players who were the world first killers of Illidan. And I got to be Illidan from his perspective. And it was about me the whole time. And like now I've gone back and I read through the book from it. And so it makes way more sense. But even as a story skipper, it felt awesome. It felt like fan service. It felt like a callback. And then you could talk to somebody, they're like, do you want to do that again? And then I did it again. I'm a story skipper. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do that again. And they're like, we're not giving you any rewards. That's fine. I'm just gonna do that fight again because I'm not even narratively invested. And this is awesome because I've been in this community since 2004 and it's awesome. And it's just awesome because it is. It doesn't need to be any deeper than that.
And I truly, from the bottom of my heart, hope the new direction WoW seems to be headed with Dragonflight is the start of something new for the game. Because it's so sad that a game that I played for 15 years couldn't find a way to connect with me as a player in a setting that very much should have. Yet a game that I just started playing 2 years ago has managed to consistently and in unexpected ways do things that a lot of AAA game developers simply aren't willing to do. And so to stick with the theme, I hope to see great things from both these games in the future as we move into the next phase of their existence and beyond. And I hope you find the game for you. I hope you enjoy yourself. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what he said. I'm willing to give some context to where, like, you know, obviously he cut this down to 21 minutes and he acknowledged that this could be, you could talk about this for hours. But I do think that, like, World of Warcraft has some things about, like, the nature of the format of their game that if they want to tell better stories, it's going to be an uphill battle. But the advantage is, if they tell a good story, they should be praised for it, as opposed to Final Fantasy. There are people that played Endwalker and they're like, it was good, but it wasn't good enough. And so they have this, like, home field advantage, yes, but they have to knock it out of the park. They have to deliver. If Endwalker had been a letdown, I think that Eorzea would have been lit on fire. Literally, permanently. Screw Thavnair. So I do think that would have been... something where I hope Dragonflight can do better. And Final Fantasy's in a healthy state, and so what we have to hope for Final Fantasy is that it stays good. That it stays good. And so I think that's really exciting. I think, you know, there's a lot on the horizon that has me excited. Dragonflight's off to a good start. A good start is all that. You know, Shadowlands had a good start. BFA had a good start. I enjoy expansions on start, so that doesn't shock me. A game being good at less than 3 months is not hard. A game being good at less than a year is not insane. But a game staying good all the way through to its completion is very, very difficult. You know, and I think you can even see that in the Final Fantasy community. Stormblood, if you look at the content that was released, and you look at when it was released and the communication around the game, Stormblood crushed it. And yet, because narratively, it did not pay off for a lot of people in a way that they hoped, there are actually a lot of Final Fantasy fans that don't hold it up as high as Heavensward or Shadowbringers. And as a skipper at that point, who's now been invested in lore, I really couldn't see why, because it delivered everything that Heavensward did and then some. And Shadowbringers actually had to pull back on some systems to make some other stuff happen. And so, like, Stormblood really knocked it out of the park as a video game, but narratively it didn't hold up. So for some players. And so I think that a game that can get people excited about the lore, even if it's just them watching a novel video at the end, is important. And that doesn't mean that the people who work on story are the only important ones. The raid designers are important. The loot designers are important. You know, all the different systems. The people who build all the side stuff, from pet battles to crafting and gathering and all that, that's all important. So I don't like when lore gets held up as so important that nothing else matters without it. I don't like these celebrity devs being the only ones that matter, but I do think that it is an important element, and it needs to matter as much as these other categories. And it would be exciting to live in a world where World of Warcraft could be telling meaningful stories, so that maybe you engage in the story and that's all you do. Maybe you engage in the raids and that's all you do. But if you ever engage in the story and you realize you want more from the game, you get to go see what all the other brilliant developers on the game have been doing. And if you've ever been a long-time raider and you come across a boss that you think's just freaking cool, and you decide to go Google it and watch a novel video on it, you're like, actually, the lore on that is pretty cool too. And so if you're somebody who consumes an entire game, that's great, but most of us aren't. Most of us consume parts of a game that's this large, and it would be neat to know that the quality holds up, not just for other people so that they're having fun too, but also so that if you ever decide to change the way you play or shift the way you play, as I've been slowly shifting to being more narratively driven, it's been nice to know that the story has been there waiting for me the whole time. I enjoyed Heavensward immensely during Heavensward. And now I'm going back and I'm playing basically a whole new game as my story character goes through Heavensward. And that's really neat to know that that was there waiting for me, because not just the reasons I played then were good, but all the reasons I didn't play were good as well.